Have you ever looked at your phone and sighed because you already know what the call is about? Maybe it's your son needing a quick loan just until payday, or your daughter asking if you can watch the grandkids again because something's come up. They don't ask how you're doing. They don't call to check in. They call when they need something. And you always say yes. Because you love them. Because you want to feel needed. Because you were raised to put family first. But lately, something feels off. You're starting to wonder, is this what love looks like now? Is it normal to feel more like a resource than a person? And if it isn't, what are you supposed to do about it? If that sounds familiar, I want you to know you're not alone. This is something many women quietly carry into their 60s, 70s, and beyond. And it's not just about the phone calls or the favors. It's about how we were taught, especially as mothers, to give and give until we have nothing left. But here's the thing, even love needs boundaries. Even devotion needs balance. Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment and especially on their children than the unlived life of the parent. Let that settle in for a moment. When we abandon our own needs, our own desires, our own truth, when we live only through our children, it doesn't just hurt us. It affects them too. That's why today, we're going to talk about what to do when the only time your grown kids reach out is when they want something from you. Let's start by getting real about something. The pain of feeling used. It's not just frustration. It's grief. It's the aching disappointment of giving everything, your time, your money, your energy, and realizing that your presence, your wisdom, your well-being might not be seen as valuable unless it's convenient. That's not easy to admit. But the moment you do, something powerful starts to happen. You begin to reclaim your worth. So what can you actually do when the dynamic with your adult children feels one-sided? The first step is the hardest, but also the most freeing. It's this: stop overfunctioning. Now, what does that mean? Overfunctioning is when you take on responsibilities that aren't yours. It's when your adult son forgets to pay a bill and you cover it without question. It's when your daughter drops off the kids for a weekend you never agreed to, and you cancel your plans to make it work. It's when you rearrange your own life to make theirs easier, and they don't even notice. It may feel like love, but in truth, overfunctioning is a quiet kind of self-abandonment. It's often a symptom of the unlived life, driven by unresolved guilt, fear, or the old belief that a good mother never says no. But you are not just a mother. You are a woman, a human being, and your needs matter just as much as theirs. So, how do you begin to pull back without causing more tension or guilt? Start small. The next time they ask for something, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, do I want to do this? Am I available to do this? Or am I saying yes out of fear? Fear they'll be upset, disappointed, or withdraw their love. This one question can change everything. Because saying yes out of fear is not real love. It's obligation. And obligation always builds resentment. You may worry that if you stop overfunctioning, the calls will stop altogether. And maybe, at first, they will. But here's the truth you must hold on to. The people who only show up when you're useful were never truly showing up for you. They were showing up for the function you served. And the moment that function disappears, they vanish. But isn't that important to know? You deserve relationships built on care, not convenience. And sometimes the only way to reveal what's real is to remove the crutch. When you stop doing everything, you create space for the other person to step up or walk away. Either way, clarity comes. And with clarity comes peace. Now, once you've begun the slow process of stepping back, there's another powerful move to make. Reinvest in your own life. It sounds simple, but for many women, it's actually the most radical thing they've done in decades. When you've spent a lifetime centering others, your kids, your husband, your job, it can feel selfish to suddenly ask, what do I want? But let me ask you this, if not now, when? This chapter of life, your 60s, Your 70s is not the end. It's a season of deep wisdom, rich beauty, and personal expansion. But you cannot experience that if your emotional life is still tied to how often someone else calls you. So take your power back. Start a small garden. Join a book club. Learn something new. Plan a trip just for you. It's not about filling your calendar. It's about filling your soul. Because the more you nourish your inner life, the less you depend on others to validate your worth. The second half of life isn't just an extension of the first, it's a completely different task. In the first half, we build careers, families, identities. In the second, we are called to go inward, to reclaim the parts of ourselves we gave away too soon. That means letting go of roles that no longer serve us. That means understanding that you are not just a mother, a grandmother, or a helper. You are a whole self. And wholeness doesn't come from being everything to everyone. It comes from being true to you. Now, as you begin stepping back and stepping into your own life again, something interesting will happen. You'll begin to see your children more clearly, not as extensions of yourself, but as separate people. And that, my friend, is the beginning of real love. Not enmeshment, not guilt-driven giving, but love that respects difference. Love that honors both of you as individuals. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That means the moment you realize your patterns, the moment you name what's been hidden, you stop being a victim of your story. You become the author of a new one. So if your adult children only call when they need something, let that be the wake-up call. Not to do more, but to finally do less, for them and more for you. And when the guilt creeps in, remind yourself, loving your children doesn't mean sacrificing your peace. It means showing up with a full heart, not an empty one. It means modeling strength, not martyrdom. It means teaching them, even now, that love is not measured by how much we give. It's measured by how whole we are when we give it. Let's keep going. The moment you start showing up for yourself, everything shifts. And it's not because you've become cold or unloving. It's because finally your love includes you too. One of the biggest shifts you can make now is to learn how to hold space without jumping in to fix. For so many women, especially mothers, it's almost instinctual. You hear stress in your child's voice, and your brain immediately goes into action mode. What can I do? How can I solve this? Where can I step in? But what if you didn't? What if you listened, really listened, and responded with calm presence instead of immediate action? You might say something like, "That sounds hard. I'm here for you." That's it. No money offered. No time volunteered. Just your calm, grounded self. And here's why that's powerful. It teaches your adult children emotional responsibility. It gently signals, "I trust you to handle your life." And even if they don't say it, part of them wants that message. No one wants to feel dependent forever. But if you keep stepping in, they'll never get the chance to step up. It also does something else. It releases you from being the emotional emergency hotline. You don't need to fix their relationships, their jobs, their bills. Your role isn't to rescue, it's to witness, to support with wisdom, not with self-sacrifice. Now, this next step might feel a little bold, but it's one of the most empowering things you can do. Start setting clear boundaries, out loud. I know the word boundaries can sound clinical or harsh, but it doesn't have to be. Think of it more like telling the truth about what you're available for and what you're not. If your daughter texts you last minute asking for help with the kids, and you've got a class that day, or just need a quiet evening, it's okay to say, "I love spending time with them, but I've made other plans today." That's not rejection. That's honesty. And honest relationships are the only kind that actually thrive over time. You may get pushback at first, maybe even guilt trips. You've trained people, without meaning to expect that you'll always be there, no matter what. So when that changes, it shakes things up. But you're not doing it to punish them. You're doing it to build something better, a relationship that respects you, not just what you provide. True healing comes from integration, bringing all the parts of ourselves into harmony, especially the ones we've ignored. And for many women, the part we've ignored most is the self that says no. The self that knows her limits. The self that wants quiet, rest, joy. Not because she's selfish, but because she's human. So the next time you feel stretched too thin, remind yourself, saying no isn't a betrayal. It's a doorway. A doorway back to your needs, your time, your life. And what happens when you walk through that doorway? You start attracting a different kind of energy. Maybe even from your children. Here's something fascinating. When you stop chasing, people start noticing. When you stop being the fixer, the dynamic starts to shift. Slowly, they begin to see you as a person, not just a provider. They might not say it out loud, but they'll feel the change. And in time, they may come to you not just when they need something, but when they want to connect. Really connect. But even if they don't, you will have changed. You'll be standing on your own feet again, not waiting by the phone, not defining your day or your worth by who needs you. Let's talk for a moment about the emotional toll of always being needed but rarely seen. That weight over time can turn into something heavier: resentment, sadness, sometimes even illness. When the body feels unimportant, it starts to echo that message. The tension in your shoulders, the fatigue, the low-level sadness that's hard to name, all of it can be traced back to one truth: you're not being nourished. So I want to ask you gently, when was the last time you did something just because it made you happy? Not to be productive, not to help someone, but because it filled your spirit? And if it's been too long, let that be your invitation. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to feel joy without earning it. You are allowed to rest without apologizing. Sometimes healing begins with the smallest act of rebellion, like buying yourself flowers, walking in the sun without your phone, or sitting in silence just to feel what's really there. That's not indulgence. That's remembering who you are. The individuation process isn't about separating from others in a cold or distant way. It's about becoming whole, about finally integrating all the parts of ourselves we left behind. For many women, that includes the playful self, the creative self, the spiritual self. The woman who once dreamed big, but shelved those dreams for diapers and dinner. It's not too late to bring her back. That woman, the one who reads poetry under her breath or dances when no one's watching, she still lives inside you. She may be quiet, but she's waiting. And the beautiful thing is, you don't need anyone's permission to welcome her home. So maybe your kids only call when they need something. That's hard. It's real. But it's not the end of the story. Because every time you choose yourself, every time you soften your grip and return to center, you write a new page. And it's a page no one else gets to write but you. You are allowed to grow, even now. You are allowed to evolve, even if no one else sees it. And you are allowed to ask yourself, not what do they need from me, but what do I need from life now? Let's go deeper. There's a moment, quiet but powerful, that comes when you stop waiting for someone else to change. When you stop hoping that a child will suddenly become more thoughtful, more appreciative, more available. In that moment, something extraordinary happens. You stop outsourcing your peace. And when you do that, your world starts to open in new and unexpected ways. One of the most important steps you can take now is this: begin creating connection outside the parent-child dynamic. And I don't just mean making small talk at church or joining a walking group, though those things can be wonderful. I mean genuine connection. The kind that sees you, not for what you can offer, but for who you are. There are women out there who feel just like you. Women who gave everything and are now wondering what comes next. Women who are waking up to the truth that this next chapter isn't about being useful. It's about being real. It's about laughter that comes from the belly, not politeness. It's about long walks with no agenda and cups of tea that don't revolve around someone else's crisis. And it's also about letting yourself feel what you've pushed down for too long. Because let's be honest, sometimes the hardest part of all this isn't your children's behavior. It's the grief that comes from finally facing what you hoped your relationship would be and realizing it may never look that way. That grief is sacred. It deserves space. Don't rush through it. Don't try to paint it over with busyness. Sit with it. Cry if you need to. Write letters you'll never send. Give your heart the honesty it's been starving for. Because beneath that grief is clarity. And clarity is a gift. True healing requires the courage to confront the shadow, the parts of ourselves and our lives we'd rather not see. But here's the beauty. Once you face the shadow, it no longer controls you. Once you look directly at the pain, it loses its power to define you. And from that place of deep inner truth, something starts to grow. Inner authority. Inner authority is what happens when you stop needing external validation to feel secure. When you can sit with your choices, your values, your desires, and say, "This is who I am, and that's enough." It's what allows you to say no without guilt. It's what helps you sleep peacefully, even when your phone stays silent. It's what lets you enjoy a quiet Sunday morning without feeling like you're being forgotten. Because here's the secret. Being needed is not the same as being loved. Let that sink in. Being needed means someone depends on what you provide. Being loved means someone cherishes who you are. And if your relationships are only rooted in need, then they aren't really love. They're arrangements. That's not to say your children don't love you. But love, like anything, needs tending. It needs boundaries. It needs presence. And yes, it needs reciprocity. And if that's missing, it's okay to name it. It's okay to say, even just to yourself, "I need more than this." That doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you human. So maybe now is the time to quietly shift your center of gravity, to move the weight of your attention back home, into your own body, your own dreams, your own peace. Take a moment today, even just 10 minutes, to do something that nourishes you. Maybe it's watching the light move across the room. Maybe it's playing a song that reminds you of who you used to be. Maybe it's pulling out an old journal or stepping outside with bare feet just to feel the ground. These small moments, they're not small at all. They're medicine. They're how we remind ourselves, I am here. I am whole. I am more than what I've given away. And don't be surprised if, over time, your children start to feel that shift. They may not name it, but they will feel it. They may even become a little uncomfortable at first. That's okay. When we change, others have to adjust. But that's not your burden to carry. Your job is simply to keep returning to yourself. You've spent decades answering the phone for everyone else. Now it's time to answer the call of your own soul. And if that call says rest, rest. If it says dance, dance. If it says write, paint, pray, sing, build, wander, then do that. The life you've been waiting for isn't in the next favor, the next visit, the next voicemail. It's already here. It's always been here. Within every person is the seed of the divine, the eternal. Something unshakable, untouchable by time or sorrow. And that's what you're coming home to now. Not just freedom, but essence. Not just space, but spirit. So if your children still only call when they want something, let them. But don't make their call the center of your world. You've got bigger things to tend now, like your own becoming. Like the quiet miracle of waking up each day and choosing to live, not just exist. And in the space where you once waited for their approval, their gratitude, their affection, let yourself bloom instead. Because your life is not on hold. It is not behind you. It is not over. It is right here, waiting. When you finally make peace with the idea that your children's behavior is not a reflection of your worth, you start breathing differently. You start living differently. You no longer hustle for appreciation or bend yourself into shapes to stay relevant. You stand, simply and powerfully, as yourself, complete without apology. And here's something beautiful to remember. When you reclaim your space, your dignity, your time, you're not creating distance, you're creating clarity. That clarity helps everyone in the relationship, including your children. Because what happens when your children experience a mother who is grounded in her own wholeness, not clinging to theirs? They begin to relate to you as an equal. They begin to see you as a person, not just the person who does the cooking or the babysitting or the lending, but a woman with boundaries, with joy, with a life. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And so many women in their 60s and beyond are just beginning to discover what that actually means. Maybe you spent years being the glue of the family, the emotional caretaker, the steady hand. But now, perhaps for the first time, you're free to ask, who am I when I'm not rescuing someone else? And maybe, just maybe, you're realizing that freedom isn't selfish. It's sacred. This doesn't mean you stop loving your children. It means you start loving yourself with the same compassion you've poured into them. It means you stop offering parts of yourself you no longer have to give. It means you release the need to be constantly needed and allow a new kind of connection to emerge, one built not on dependency, but on mutual respect. And yes, there may still be quiet days. Days when no one calls. Days when the silence in the house echoes a little too loudly. But those aren't empty days. They're open days. Days where you get to decide what joy looks like, what beauty feels like, what being alive really means to you. So maybe instead of waiting for the next phone call, you write one. Not to your kids, but to yourself. Write about what you're discovering. About how proud you are to be evolving, even now. About the courage it takes to live honestly, to release old roles, and to create new meaning. And if the grief still lingers, let it. You're not weak for feeling disappointed. You're human. But don't let grief chain you to yesterday. Let it soften you. Let it open your heart in new directions. Toward friendships that feel like sunlight. Toward creativity. Toward grace. You might find that your world slowly fills with the kind of love that doesn't come with strings attached. That doesn't ask you to prove your worth. That simply delights in your presence. And if one day your adult children begin to show up differently, to call just to hear your voice, to visit without an agenda, receive that as a gift, not a need. Receive it without bitterness or, it's about time. Because part of your healing is letting go of the scoreboard. You're not counting who called last or who said thank you. You're too free for that now. Now, you're living with a different kind of richness. One that comes from individuation, the full flowering of the self. And you've earned it. Every bit of it. So what should you do when your adult kids only call when they need something? You meet the moment with clarity, with love, and with boundaries. You listen without fixing. You give without guilt. You say no without shame. And you build a life so rich in meaning that no phone call can define your day. That's not just healing. That's wisdom. That's grace. And that's you. So take this moment, right now, and put your hand on your heart. Breathe in. And remind yourself, I am allowed to rest. I am allowed to grow. I am allowed to be loved, not just needed. If this message spoke to you, I hope you'll share your thoughts below. I read every comment. Your story, your voice, it matters. And if you know another woman who needs to hear this, send it to her. We heal better when we heal together. Don't forget to like the video if it brought you peace. And if you want more content that honors your wisdom, your strength, and your journey, make sure you subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. Because your life still holds so much beauty, so much joy, so much you. And here's the truth no one tells you enough. You don't have to be everything to everyone. You just have to be yourself. Here's to living your truth at any age.